report estimates that 1 in 3 families in Metro Vancouver are not earning the new living wage. And those families are having to make really, really difficult choices every single day. Do they pay for gas? Do they pay for groceries? Do they put more money on their credit card and accumulate more debt? Do they take on more hours or take on a new job? And that's time, if they do work more hours, that's time they're not spending with their families or in the local community or focusing on their well-being. And all of it is leading to a lot of stress and anxiety for a lot of people right now.
Minimum wage is at $16.75, as you said. Inflation has also hit small business owners. So how can they be tasked or be responsible for making up those gaps? It
is the new living wage. It's a challenge for many employers, and I definitely accept that. And actually, it really shows why government needs to take action on affordability, because if they can bring down the cost of housing and food, that makes it better for not just for low-wage workers who are really struggling, but it makes it easier and better for employers to pay a living wage. I speak to employers all the time, and they understand the importance of paying a living wage. They want to make sure that their workers are taken care of and aren't stressed. But the problem is that when you've got a living wage that's so high, it does become a challenge. One thing I'd say to any employers who are listening and attempted to join the program is that the living wage does also include any non-mandatory benefits that you offer. So if an employer offers a full health and dental package, that lowers their living wage requirements by about $2 an hour, which makes it slightly more manageable.
That's interesting. I think we might be hearing from a small business owner in just a moment here. Let's go through those numbers once again. And so the 2023 living wage report shows that the Metro Vancouver living wage for a family has to spend more than $4,000 more than last year to spend on the same basket of goods, and $68 to be precise is the living wage for Metro Vancouver now. In Greater Victoria, the living wage is $25.40. That's a 4.6% from last year. In Kelowna, it is $24.60, a 7.5% increase, and Prince George, $22.09. You can let us know what it's like in your part of the province as well. We do have a chart here for other parts of BC. Trail is now at $21.55, a 42-cent increase from last year. Powell River, $25.06, and Clayoquot Sound, $26.51. The highest there. What's behind that?
It's housing. And in particular, in those communities which depend a lot on tourism, like Tofino and Nucluelet, the availability of housing is really an issue, in particular 3-bedroom housing. So, maybe the short-term rental changes that are coming in, that might make a difference for some communities like that. But really, more housing needs to be built.
Let's go to our callers now. We're asking you how that gap between the living wage and minimum wage is affecting you. What are the costs that you can't afford? And should businesses be paying a living wage? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And my guest is Anastasia French, Provincial Manager for Living Wage for Families, BC. Let's go to Chilliwack. And Peter is on the line now. Hi, Peter.
Good afternoon.
Yes, what's your reaction to these findings?
Well, they're appalling. And what I just want to argue is that there's some very simple and fair solutions. One would be for provincial and federal governments, maybe local governments, to provide some kind of tax incentives. So if we're talking about, small businesses, family run, and so on, they should get some kind of tax breaks so they can, in return for paying a living wage to their employees. A second approach would be to make up the tax revenue if necessary, is to raise taxes on large corporations and, multimillionaires because they can afford it. And the last point is that when people get paid a living wage, they spend that money in the community, locally again. They're not going on trips into space or something.
Okay, I see Anastasia nodding her head to that, yeah.
So there are simple and fair solutions to make sure that everybody has a decent life. I mean, we're not a poor country.
And Peter, for yourself, how does this affect you personally, or does it?
It doesn't, because I'm retired. I'm working part-time, but I'm basically retired.
Right. Okay. Well, Peter, thank you. Interesting ideas that you put forward there. Thanks for the call from Chilliwack. Anastasia, what do you think?
Yeah, some really interesting ideas there. The Tourism Institute of Ontario have just worked with the Ontario government to introduce a grant to help those businesses in the tourism industry pay a living wage. And I'm really interested to see the results of that and the impact that that has. And I would very much encourage the BC government to look at what grants and incentives they can give to encourage employers to pay a living wage. Because he's completely correct that actually when low-wage workers get a pay increase, they're far more likely to spend that money and spend it money locally than when high-wage workers get a pay increase. Because low-wage workers might treat themselves to a haircut or an evening out in a local restaurant, whereas high-wage workers may choose to invest it or on international vacations and things like that.
And you have been putting out these reports year over year, year per year, and pushing for higher wages for workers. What has been the response from the provincial government?
The provincial government talk very much of how supportive they are, and they have made a lot of roads over the past 5 years to increase the minimum wage, and it's good that they are now pegging the minimum wage to the rate of inflation. But the reality is, as our living wage report finds every single year, is that the living wage goes up at a higher rate than the rate of inflation, and the reason for that is we look at what the essentials are that people are facing, and those essentials are going up at a far higher rate than the cost of things like luxury goods and appliances and furniture, which all go into the general inflation rate.
Right. So there's the general inflation rate, but the food cost inflation is higher, goes up at a higher rate. And so that's what's affecting people. What are you calling for the province to do?
So we've got several different asks. One is to lift wages, both lifting the minimum wage and closing that gap between the minimum and the living wage. Also, that we would urge the provincial government to look at making sure they can pay a living wage to both their direct staff, their contracted workers, all of the Crown Corps. They have so much influence in how wages are beyond just kind of ensuring the minimum wage is higher. And then we'd also like them to continue to take serious action on affordability. How can we bring down the cost of housing? A lot has been said, a lot of money has been invested, but we need to see changes happening, and we need to make sure that renters right now are protected by things. And in addition, we need to tackle the fact that food costs are just getting higher and higher and higher.
Asking you, how are high costs of living impacting your life? Should more employers be adopting a living wage? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Rick is joining us from Victoria. What are your thoughts on the living wage, Rick?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
More in line with what the other caller had mentioned. I think more fair taxation around how people make money would go a long way. Like, for example, right now, if you trade your time for money working at a job, and say you work overtime away from your family out on the rigs, you're taxed more than double what an investor would make for earning the same amount of money. That's because capital gains is taxed at a 50% inclusion rate. So whatever money you make through an investment, only half of it is taxed at whatever rate you're taxed at. So that would be a lower income tax bracket. So like if you made $100,000, $50,000 is tax-free. The other $50,000 is taxed at the rate of $50,000, of which I think the first $18,000 is tax-free because you're lower income at that point. So what I would argue for is, rather than giving a tax break to people that are fortunate enough to have enough money that they can invest, instead of giving them a 50% tax break, tax it equal. So it doesn't matter where your money comes from, you're taxed equal across the board, and use that through a revenue neutral way to lower the taxes for the lower earners. You could do that maybe per area, not to get too complicated, but like whatever living wage is for each individual area, so that you're tax exempt, maybe up to $40,000, $50,000, whatever it may be. Typically, the argument against raising the capital gains to be 100% included in your taxes is that, well, we need to incentivize people to invest.
I was going to ask you that. What would investors think in terms of what they would see as their contribution? Yeah.
Right. So that made sense when we had to incentivize investors because people used to just put their money under their bed or whatever. Like after the Great Depression, people would just hold on to their money. No, we need that money going into the economy. Investors know now that if you don't invest your money, you're losing money. You're losing to inflation. So I'm not arguing that you're to like completely take away investing. I'm just saying tax it fairly. So instead of making like $89,000 tax-free or after taxes on your $100,000 investment. Instead, you make $70,000 after your $100,000 investment. So you're not going to just walk away and say, well, I'm not going to invest anymore because I'm being taxed on it.
Okay.
Because you're still making your $70,000 off of it.
And
then
that
also
greater
carve out somewhere.
Right, go ahead. And I think you're getting to this too. Is where would the greater tax revenue then? Where should that go?
To lowering the taxes for the lower earners. Because if somebody has to trade all their time to raise capital, they don't have time to think about their health or how to improve their life or maybe go back to school or whatever that might be. When you have to trade all your time for money and you're taxed at the highest rate compared to other people that have enough money that don't have to
Okay.
work,
I understand.
Work for a living, it frees up that time.
Yeah. Rick, thank you very much for that. I think that last point that he made, your time is consumed with working, perhaps multiple jobs, and so you don't have a lot of time to take care of your health and to do other things in your life. So it's about cost, but also quality of life.
Yeah, completely. And I think some of the reality is also that when you earn more money, you can afford to pay someone who knows a lot more about taxes to help work out which loopholes you should be going for and those kind of things. Whereas low-wage workers are living paycheck to paycheck, and their brain is purely focused, understandably, on how they're going to put food on the table for their families.
And he was saying that it's about taxes, but what you found is the base cost of goods and rent is the biggest source of rising costs for people.
I mean, that the costs are going up, and that's what it is. Government are doing some things to help, less focused on taxation measures and more focused on giving more money to people. So things like the grocery rebate and those childcare fee reductions, and they're helping a little bit, but they're not doing enough to offset those rising costs. I think the other thing to note is that a lot of the benefits that government are giving are focused on families with children, which is great and is very much necessary. But right now, food and housing are affecting everyone, and so government needs to look at what they can do to help everyone who is struggling right now.
Asking you, if you're struggling, how are the high costs of living affecting your life? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. As the latest report on living wage around BC finds increases across the board. In Metro Vancouver, $25.68 has been pegged as the living wage for 2023. Heather is joining us in Victoria. And hi there, Heather. Thanks very much for joining us. In Greater Victoria, the living wage is now $25.40. How are you being affected by these costs, Heather?
Oh, hi. Well, my story is a little different. I am reaching a retirement age. I'm okay. I am a homeowner. I have two children that are coming into those years where they usually would be thinking about having kids. My daughter is my oldest, and I've asked her recently, and she said, Mom, I can't afford a home. I don't think I'm going to have kids. And that was a big shock. So how I'm being affected is not getting to be a grandparent. So I haven't heard any other listeners so far talking because they're more directly, related to getting through the month and so forth. But the ripple out from this is going to be huge if things don't swing around.
Yeah.
And we may start seeing, everyone living together again and all that sort of thing. But I'm still getting wrapped around that fact that my daughter, who would be a great mom, may not do that. So that's my story.
Heather, thank you very much. We, in fact, talked about this last week, right? As we talked about housing costs and how they're affecting young families in BC. And we asked people, and some did say, I delayed or decided not to have children because housing costs were just too high. I appreciate hearing your story, Heather. Thank you very much for the call from Victoria. Those are things you can't account for, right, in your report, but those sort of, as she said, ripple effects from people struggling with the costs and the decisions they're making.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the reasons why the living wage was calculated in the first place using a two-parent, two-children family model was to make sure that people didn't choose, if they were earning a living wage, they didn't have to put off having children. And costs are getting really high, and it is substantial. It is really difficult right now. The other thing is also people are making the choice to stay living with their parents longer than they would want to. Census figures show that people are staying living at home with their parents into their late 20s and early 30s. And some of that might be because they want to, because they love their mum and dad, and some of it is because they can't afford to look elsewhere. And people on the other side are also putting off retiring because they need to earn more money, or they're retiring and still working part-time and not being able to enjoy the kind of freedom of their later years.
These are the very personal stories that illustrate the numbers that you have gone through. And we have another caller now from West Vancouver. Lorna, welcome to the show. What do you want to say about the living wage? Hi there, Lorna. Can you hear me? Hi, Lorna. Hi, Lorna? I think we've lost our connection with Lorna. Lorna, can you hear me at all?
I can hear you, but you don't hear me.
I hear you now. So glad that you've called us. Can you tell us what you're observing in West Van?
Well, I'm observing one thing, and I just have to say this very politely with a lot of respect, that I think your guest is speaking way too quickly for some people who might be struggling with the language or having hearing issues or whatever.
Okay.
I just want to put that out. In West Vancouver, I found a number of things that are discrepancies between prices that cannot really be easily explained other than that the grocery stores are taking advantage of the current situation. And yesterday, as I was saying to your producer, I bought 2 items and saved $10 by going to a slightly different store. One was London Drugs, and another one is a local store owned with a variety of other stores that are Persia Foods. Mm-hmm. So I've been told when I called in previously that I have time. I do have time, and my time I'd like to put it into a productive situation to find out how can one challenge at that level the current prices. Mm. And I think it's maybe not appropriate, but everybody is struggling with costs. Everywhere I go, I see people with big eyes when they see a price.
Yeah.
Myself, so. Yeah. It's a big, complex situation, and I have 2 artists as children, so I see how they are struggling and also not deciding to have children. Wow. So anyway, that's my comment.
Well, thank you very much for your comment, Lorna. A fair point there. And we've heard that. Go to the various stores and perhaps look for the smaller stores. They may have cheaper prices for you. That is something, though, when it comes to grocery prices, we know the federal government is trying to tackle.
Yeah. Also, sorry for speaking too quickly. I get nervous. And
you're doing just fine.
But the reality is, yes, you can shop around and you can find cheaper deals, but that takes time. And that goes back to your time point about if you're working multiple jobs just to put food on the table, you barely have time to go to one grocery store, let alone go around to 2 or 3 to try and find the cheapest deals. On a personal level, I know I find more affordable prices when I go to the more independent stores, but that's not always available. Sometimes you have to. They're not walkable. They're not within a walkable distance, and it does result in a challenge. And the big grocery stores are making record profits at the moment on the back of both their customers and also a lot of their workers who are working frontline, stacking those shelves. We applauded them during the pandemic, and they're making just above minimum wage.
Thank you so much for your time. Really good to speak with you today.
Thank you.
Anastasia French is the provincial manager for Living Wage for Families BC. And Lorna may want her artist children to listen to our next half hour as well, because we will talk about art and what the implications are of artificial intelligence. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Chad Pawson.
Good afternoon. It's been 4 days since high-risk sex offender Randall Hopley walked away from a Vancouver halfway house after removing his ankle monitor. He was declared a long-term offender and handed a 6-year prison term following the 2011 abduction of a 3-year-old boy in Sparwood. Vancouver police say they've received multiple tips from the public since releasing Hopley's images online and through news outlets. A Canada-wide warrant has also been issued for Hopley. Climate scientists say a red-hot October almost guarantees this will be the hottest year on record. It was the 5th straight month that Earth set a record for the hottest month in recorded history, and it did so by a big margin compared to the Octobers of pre-industrial times, 1.7 degrees Celsius hotter. Lung cancer deaths are in the decline in Canada. The Canadian Cancer Society says fatalities have been decreasing by 4% a year since 2015. The society says fewer smokers and improvements in early detection are the main factors. Lung cancer is still the leading cause of cancer deaths in Canada. And in Vancouver, there was a somber ceremony today at Victory Square to mark National Aboriginal Veterans Day. Wreaths were laid at the cenotaph, and flags at the legislature have been lowered at half-mast to mark the solemn occasion. The province notes that Indigenous veterans served with valor and distinction. abroad in military conflicts, yet often returned home to BC where they faced discrimination and mistreatment. And Michelle, a quick look at the weather. Mostly raining and mild along the south coast and north coast in BC today. It's currently 8 degrees in Vancouver, a mix of sun and cloud in the southern and central interiors, sunny and 5 degrees in the Kootenays and the northeast of the province.
Thank you so much, Chad. It's Chad Pawson with the CBC Vancouver News from the Vancouver newsroom. And we will have more on National Aboriginal Veterans Day for you in just a moment. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We are on Radio 1, 88.1 FM, live streaming as well, CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, on YouTube at CBC Vancouver. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. And as you heard, today is National Aboriginal Veterans Day, honoring Indigenous veterans who have served. And this morning, a community celebration and honor march were held in downtown Vancouver, leading up to Victory Square. And here's some of what that sounded and looked like. You can see some of the photos and the pictures on our live stream. CBC's Leanne Young was there and spoke with U.S. Marine Corps veteran Jamie Thomas of the Snuneymuxw First Nation and a founding member of the Vancouver chapter of the National Aboriginal Veterans Association.
It gives us an opportunity to use our own language, culture, and ceremony, and come together and share with the other people that are willing to join us. We're not exclusive. We've always been inclusive. So we have the Canadian veterans, Canadian military non-Indigenous veterans, the Chinese veterans, the Vancouver City Police, the RCMP, and they all come out and join us, and we practice our own traditional ceremony and acknowledgement of and the fact that we've been involved in every conflict that the country of Canada has had. So give us an opportunity to do that.
And what's it like, knowing the history of Indigenous people in this country? We're all still working through truth and reconciliation, especially that reconciliation part, seeing the support in behind you.
Well, it didn't start like this. This isn't something that just happened overnight. Like I said, I've been marching with him for 20 some odd years, and it's evolved over time. Prior to that, we weren't even recognized in the local cenotaphs at that point. And when my father started coming, they weren't really supported in what they were doing, as my father served in World War II in the Navy. And they had a huge challenge of getting recognized and stuff like that. So today is a work in progress. We're looking to move forward with it, and it's always a positive aspect to see the support that we have from the various politicians, community support, and agencies.
That's Leanne Young speaking with Jamie Thomas, an Indigenous veteran who served with the U.S. Marine Corps between 1984 and 1990. And this morning's march led to Victory Square, where a wreath lay service was held and a tribute as well. Each year on November 8th marks National Indigenous Veterans Day in recognition of Indigenous veterans' contributions to military service. It was first commemorated in 1994. And Remembrance Day is this Saturday, November 11th. It is 12:38 now, 1:38 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Well, the Beatles magically have a new song. It's called Now and Then. It was released last week using artificial intelligence to blend John Lennon's own voice from a demo recording 40 years ago with 1995 recordings from George Harrison and finished by the band's two surviving members, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. Now, fans have embraced the new material from the legendary band, but the release also stirs debate around the use of AI and the arts. And that's what we're asking you about today. What do you think of the way the new Beatles song was put together? And what do you think AI will mean for music, for film, and art? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, a UBC PhD student has been studying the way we respond to music that's been created by AI. Guangzhong Du is a PhD student in marketing and behavioral science at UBC, and I spoke with him this morning.
So we just published a paper this year about AI. In this research, we studied how people perceive artwork created by AI. So we started this research project because we noticed that AI has become more creative in recent years, right? It can now create many forms of artwork like paintings and music. And what we found in our research is that people are actually very biased against AI art. For example, in one experiment, we asked participants to listen to two pieces of music. And in reality, both pieces of music are created by AI, but we randomly labeled one of them as being human-made and the other one as being AI-made. And we find that people actually find the music less creative when they think that it is created by AI, and they also experience less awe. They think it is less awe-inspiring. So clearly there is a bias against AI-made artwork. And the next question we wanted to answer in our research is where this bias comes from. So we found that people are biased because AI's ability to create art actually challenges many people's worldview that artistic creativity is a uniquely human characteristic. Why do we know that? Because in one experiment, we found that this bias is stronger among those people who strongly believe that artistic creativity is unique to human beings. Because for those people, learning that AI can also be creative is very threatening, right? It challenges their understanding of what human beings are. So I think what this means is that, whether you like AI art or not, it's not just a matter of personal taste. It's not like, some people prefer Coke and some people prefer Pepsi. It actually reflects a deeper question of what makes human beings unique, what differentiates us from others.
Guangzhong Du is a PhD student who has just published a study on AI and music. And we're asking, what do you think of the way the new Beatles song was made? What do you think of the song itself? And what do you see will be the impact of AI on the arts? We'd love to hear from you if you're an artist or if you're a fan, if you're a Beatles fan or just a fan of music and film and shows. What do you see as the impact of artificial intelligence? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Email bctoday@cbc.ca. Arnie Eichenfeld is a professor and associate dean at SFU's Music and Sound program. He joins me now. Hello.
Hello, how are you today?
I am fine. Thanks so much for joining us. You're a musician. Are you a Beatles fan?
I guess you could say I'm a Beatles fan, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, who isn't, I guess is the question. What did you think of the song?
To be honest, I actually haven't heard. I've heard all about it, but I haven't actually taken the time to listen to it. But I can imagine what it sounds like. Would be pretty familiar with that.
I have heard some of it as well. We were trying to pull a clip for our show today, and weren't able to. We did just show some portions of a documentary, visually, of a documentary there as we were listening to Guangzhong Du. But what do you think of the idea of artificial intelligence being used to put out this, a new song from a legendary band? And an icon, really, from John Lennon's voice from 40 years ago.
Yeah, I certainly have an opinion on that. Cards on the table that I've been using AI in my own artwork for many years, about 15 years now. So I'm a big proponent of using AI for as an artist using it. I think in this case, it seems to be non-controversial. It's a very positive use of the AI. It's a very, very complex and powerful tool that's being used to pull out Lennon's vocal and do that. So I can't imagine people having a lot of problem with that, because it's just, you have something that couldn't have existed previously.
Right.
So using this very, very powerful tool to do something that couldn't be possible before. I think there's other issues earlier in the year when a false Drake song was released.
Yes, that was not so positive.
That was more controversial, right? Because that was there was a lot of questions that were brought forth with that particular use, because it was creating something. The AI was actually producing something. It was reproducing a human's voice without
Right.
The legalities. There's all sorts of legal issues involved as well. But
Yeah, so if you were to compare the two here, it is actually John Lennon's voice. They have just been able to merge it with these other sounds and vocals from today as well. Did they fiddle with it at all?
No doubt they had to do a lot of very sophisticated correction on it. And I think a lot of those sort of tools, the tools are becoming very, very sophisticated in music production, but also just generally, I think artists are tending now to use a lot of digital technologies and using the computer, and it's changed the way artists interact with their tools. The computer is a tool for making art, and it's been accepted for quite a while now. And AI is just sort of a next step in potential tool for artists to use.
Okay.
And
so you see it kind of like as another instrument.
Yes, yeah, it has a tremendous power. It's the next level up, and I think one thing we should remember that artists. All artists, not just musical artists, but all artists have been using technology, and many artists will leap at the chance for any new technology and experiment and see what it can do and how it can help their artwork. And not just musical artists. Like if we look back 100 years, that the French Impressionist painters, for example, they were able to use the new oil tubes for painting, for oil painting. They were able to go out in the field and paint out in the field rather than sketch and then paint with their oil paints back in the studio. So that was a new use of technology for them. And so that was able to create a whole new style, the Impressionist style, which wasn't existing before. And so we always have, we can always point to things like that where new technologies will influence and shape and help artists create something new. So I'm very much for the artists using technology and using these very complex tools to help in their art making.
Okay. You are pro AI, so you don't feel that it stifles creativity. It can help fuel it and ignite it.
Certainly. I think, again, like any technology, it's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on labor. And that has to be acknowledged. Like we look at the Hollywood actor strike that's going on now, that is a very real concern that it's going to replace people. How it's used, the way I use it, and what I'm arguing for is, one artist using technology, using AI. I'm not going to really replace anybody. Even in a recent instance, I used AI to generate the images for my upcoming album. And but I still worked with an art director, and he was actually very, very happy that I did so because I was able to give him something that I really wanted to use. So I didn't replace anybody there. I helped in the final generation. But in the case like in the Hollywood workers' strike, Hollywood actors' strike, I mean that could have a huge change in how labor is used. And so these are issues that do have to be considered and reckoned with.
And it is very contentious in the SAG strike, certainly. Let's take some calls now. We are asking you, what do you make of the way that the new Beatles song was created using artificial intelligence? What do you think will be the impact of AI on the arts? Love to hear from you if you're an artist. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. My guest is Arnie Eichenfeld, professor and associate dean at SFU's Music and Sound program. Ted is joining us from Salmon Arm. Hi, Ted.
Hello, Michelle. How are you today?
I am just fine. Are you a Beatles fan?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think of how this came to be?
I watched the sort of the video on it.
Yeah.
And
the making of.
Got the backstory. And without the use of AI, as your previous guest, as a resource tool mentioned, you couldn't have brought, John Lennon's voice back or George Harrison's guitar part. And I think from that perspective, it's a total positive approach using the tool, recognizing that, led by Paul McCartney and his team, some of the finest creators that we know in our era on the planet used it, I think, most respectfully. And as a benchmark, going forward, if if one's reaction to a piece of work like that can be seen as they respected the technology, they didn't abuse it, then from that perspective, I would definitely, be interested in looking at other pieces of work that get created.
Are you an artist
using
yourself?
Mechanical AI. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And managing artists, artists who have, put in their time nationally, internationally, Juno Award winners. From that perspective, sort of where are they in terms of their contributions to the Canadian scene? So through their work, my own work, having an appreciation of what's involved in the songwriting, the composition process,
Sure.
getting it to market, all that kind of stuff, and to see many years later that we get to listen to Now and Then, or as it was called at one point, Give and Take, I think is just a beautiful last Beatles song, and
So how significant a step do you think this is for the other artists, the musicians you work with?
I think it's a tool. I really do. I don't see any of my own work or other artists that I associate with actually, putting a subject forward to an AI query and saying, write me a song.
Right.
And just take it for what it is. I mean, I think AI is probably one step to frame something out. It's like a rough sketch, let's say, but certainly not the final product because, and I don't know how to define it, but that human element is really significant, I think, if you were to take an AI-produced poem or song against an artist who sits down and writes from their heart, from their mind, from their skill set that they've learned and developed over whatever period of time, you can see when you read it a difference in the rhythm, a difference in just the depth of what a human would capture versus a machine.
I hope
Even
so.
though the human may have input certain criteria for the machine to follow,
Right.
it's a machine. It turns out really great stuff, but I think it's just so obvious, when you sit back and really analyze it, that that's missing something, and what it misses is the human touch.
Oh, you've said it so beautifully. Thank you so much, Ted.
Hey, thank you.
AI could not have said it better. Thanks for the call.
There we go. Okay, thanks.
Missing the human touch. I'd love to hear what you think of that. What impact will AI have on the arts? 1-800-825-5950 toll free. And in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733. Dave is joining us from Mackenzie now. Hi, Dave.
There.
Hi. Well, what do you think of AI and the arts, or AI and music?
Well, I mean, I kind of haven't really spent a lot of time learning about it, or I'm kind of a little bit freaked out about AI. But when I listened to that song, and I listened to the debut, the CBC debut, it was just on one day. I was driving down the back road, and that song came on, and I got a flashback, actually. I went right back to when I was driving in 1980 in a 1975 Gremlin, and over the radio, an announcement came that John Lennon had been shot.
Oh.
And so this, it was really an emotional experience for me.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed was his voice it just seemed like, oh my God. It was like, it sounds so alive. And so I really had a deep emotional experience with that. And that's kind of all I wanted to add.
It's a beautiful thing that you've added, Dave. Thank you so much for the call.
Thanks.
And let's go back to Arnie on that, because, again, the distinction that we make is that it is John Lennon's voice. This was not something created out of thin air by a computer. And so for him, he recognized it, and it brought him right back to that moment. Something music can do, right?
Yeah, I think the previous caller, when they said the respectful use of AI, I think that was a really nice way of putting it, because it was a song and all the people involved wanted to produce that song. All the artists involved wanted to produce it. But you can imagine that within 6 months, within a year, that a record company will look through the Beatles catalog, feed it into a deep learning system, and then maybe produce an album of songs the Beatles never created. and it could sound, the vocal, the abilities now of some of these generative AI systems to reproduce sound, reproduce voices is amazing. So it would sound just like John Lennon. But again, that wouldn't have any artists involved. It would just have the computer stamp, that it's and it would be for the purposes of commerce, right? That the record company was involved. So there's an example of unrespectful use of AI to create something that may, sell something.
Yeah.
But those sort of things are possible. I think there's a lot of issues with that. But clearly, we don't want to get into the technical problems of why I think that wouldn't work. But I always argue for I think your guest also said, or a caller said, the use of the artists. They have the background, they have the knowledge, they have the skill set. And so as long as it remains a tool for those artists, they're going to bring their own musicality, their own artistic sensibilities to it. So that's so important.
Okay. I want to ask you more about that in a moment, but Patrick is on the line now in Delta to comment on artificial intelligence and the new Beatles song. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, how you doing?
Really well. Thanks for calling.
Thank you for having me on. I've been a Beatles fan for all my life, and I think it's a great thing that they could separate John Lennon's voice and magnify it and make a true Beatles song and use Harrison's pre-recordings. Mm-hmm. However, my main concern is, I got two main concerns. Not in music, but in politics. They could make facetious speeches from different politicians and put this bad spotlight on politicians, or they... You know what I mean?
Be part of disinformation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just remembered I was listening to, on the weekend, Because News. They had three
usually comedians or...
recordings.
Oh,
yeah,
pardon
exactly. Me. 3 recordings. The middle one was the actual Beatles song, but they had 2 AI generated recordings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they asked which one was the real one.
Wow. Could you tell the difference?
I knew the difference because
Right.
I knew which one it was.
Yeah.
But, the comedians guessed the wrong ones, except for one of them.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's kind of a tragic comedy, isn't it?
Can of worms.
It's a can of worms. A can of worms. Really good point. Thank you very much for the call, Patrick. That's Patrick in Delta. Yes. So how do we avoid that, Arnie? We heard about the difference between respect and abuse. How do we avoid abuse? Is there disclosure that's going to be necessary?
Well, I think there was a recent discussion with the Grammys that there was a limit as to how much AI could be used in a creation, because I think there's a lot of these advanced technologies that are already being used. And if you're just thinking of, for example, using AI to help a producer create a new drum beat, that's a certain percentage of the song. And you're not going to say, well, that song is now produced by AI, but you could have, like the caller just suggested, an entire piece of music generated by AI. I guess we're going to just rely on honesty, but I think I personally do think that you can tell the difference, that the problem with the way the generative AI works now is it's trying to reproduce something it already knows. You think of the chat GPT,
right.
All it can do is reproduce what's in its database.
Yeah.
And being able to produce something truly new and innovative, it's just not there yet. It just can't do that. So if you want more of the same, the AI is there for you.
They're not there yet, I think, is where my brain starts to worry. Thank you so much. What a fascinating discussion.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's Arnie Eichenfeld, Professor and Associate Dean at SFU's Music and Sound Program. That's it for our show today. Thank you so much to everyone who called in and joined our discussion. Thanks to our guests as well. You can listen again on CBC Listen and watch us on YouTube. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon.